Welcome to Criminal Law class. This is an introduction to homicide, understanding the structure of homicide and the relationship between different homicide offences. My name is Nasir Hafizi. I am a solicitor and a senior lecturer. Now, the learning objectives of this class is to introduce you to key homicide offences, primarily murder, voluntary manslaughter and the two partial defences, loss of control and diminished responsibility. Involuntary manslaughter, and there's two that I mentioned here, unlawful act manslaughter and gross negligence manslaughter. And I want to explain some of the key actus reus elements of homicide offences. As always, there are a set of true and false questions, and this class is no different to check your knowledge. So the first question is true or false? In English law, homicide is a single offence defined by statute. Question 2 is true or false? Murder is the most serious form of homicide in English and Welsh law. Question 3, true or false? Voluntary manslaughter includes partial defences such as diminished responsibility and loss of control. Question 4, true or false? The actus reus of all homicide offences requires the unlawful killing of a human being. Question 5, true or false? In R versus Poulton 1832, the court held that to qualify as a victim of homicide, a child must be wholly expelled from the mother alive and have independent existence. Question 6, true or false? In Attorney General Reference number 3 of 1994, the House of Lords ruled that mens rea directed at the mother could not be transferred to the fetus. Question 7, true or false? In the case of A conjoined twins 2000, the Court of Appeal ruled that both twins should be regarded as human beings under homicide law, even though one was dependent on the other for survival. Question 8, true or false? In R versus Malcherek and Steele 1981, the Court of Appeal confirmed that brainstem death is sufficient to establish that a victim has died. Question 9, true or false? Lawful killings, such as a police officer shooting a terrorist to prevent mass loss of life, do not amount to homicide. And question 10, true or false? For causation in homicide, the defendant must be both the factual and legal cause of death. And as always in these criminal law classes, there's a set of single best answer questions. Some are simple, some are more complicated. These first two I would classify as simple. Question 1, a woman goes into labour at home. Before the baby is fully delivered, the defendant violently assaults her, causing serious injuries. The baby is partially delivered but dies during birth from complications linked to the assault. Which is the correct legal position? Is it A, D can be guilty of homicide because any injury to a fetus is homicide? Is it B, D can be guilty of homicide because partial expulsion from the mother is enough? Is the answer C, D cannot be guilty of homicide because a child must be fully expelled from the mother and have independent existence? Is the answer D, D can only be guilty if the child lived for at least 24 hours after birth? Or is the answer E, D is guilty of homicide because mens rea against the mother automatically transfers to the fetus? Looking at single best answer question 2, the defendant stabs the victim in the chest. The victim is rushed to hospital where doctors diagnose a punctured lung. The doctors negligently fail to provide proper treatment and the victim dies. The defendant argues he is not guilty of homicide because the doctor's negligence broke the chain of causation. Which is the correct legal position? Is it A, defendant is not guilty because negligent medical treatment always breaks the chain of causation? Is it B, D is guilty only if he foresaw the negligence of the doctors? Is the answer C, D is not guilty because doctors are responsible for their own error? Or is it D, D is guilty because the original wound remained an operating and substantial cause of death? Or is the answer E, D is guilty only if the doctors acted with gross negligence? Turning now to single best answer question 3. During a terrorist attack in central London, the defendant fires indiscriminately into a crowd. The victim is struck in the head by a bullet. The victim is rushed to hospital and placed on a ventilator. Doctors conduct extensive tests and determine that the victim has suffered irreversible brain stem death. Despite artificial ventilation, V shows no independent brain activity. 2 senior consultants confirmed the diagnosis in line with medical practice. After discussion with the victim's family, doctors lawfully withdraw life support. Victim's heart stops and death is formally recorded. The defence barrister argues in court that because the victim only died after doctors turned off the ventilator, the doctors caused the death, not the defendant. Which is the correct legal position? Is it A, turning off the ventilator is homicide because it directly caused the victim's death? Is it B, turning off the ventilator is not homicide because brainstem death is the legal definition of death and the defendant remains liable? Is the answer C, the doctors are guilty of homicide because they caused death by withdrawing treatment? Is the answer D, D is not guilty of homicide because the victim was already brain dead before the ventilator was switched off? Is the answer E, nobody's guilty of homicide because medical treatment, not the bullet wound, was the immediate cause of death? So let's explore homicide in a bit more detail. The gravity of unlawful killing. The unlawful killing of a person is generally regarded as one of the most heinous crimes it is possible to commit. As a consequence, there is extensive media coverage of such offences. Take, for example, the mass murder, Dr. Harold Shipman and Fred and Rose West. Look at the youth violence, fatal stabbings of teenagers. And also consider sometimes mercy killings, relatives ending suffering of loved ones. They all make the news. Now, there are different types of homicide offences. Although there is currently no such offence in English and Welsh law, the word homicide is used as a generic term for unlawful killing. The term encompasses situations where the defendant is criminally liable for the death of the victim. So you have murder at the top of the tree is the most serious. Then you have voluntary manslaughter, partial defence of diminished responsibility and loss of control. You have unlawful act manslaughter, also known as constructive manslaughter, a form of involuntary manslaughter. And then you have gross negligence and corporate manslaughter, a form of, again, involuntary manslaughter. It's important to look at international comparisons so you don't get confused when you're talking about the law in England and Wales. So in England and Wales, we have murder, which is the most serious. We have voluntary manslaughter, diminished responsibility. We have voluntary manslaughter, and we have loss of control. We have involuntary manslaughter, unlawful act manslaughter, and we have involuntary manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter. In the United States, they have something which is called first-degree murder and second-degree murder. In Denmark, there is other ways that they consider, they look at general murder, child killings, mercy killings, and genocide. Now, the Law Commission proposed changes to the current classification. You can see that in Report 304, as criticisms exist that murder covers such a wide range of behaviour. The mercy killer and terrorist both receive life imprisonment despite vastly different motivations. Now, the actus reus of homicide, the common element in all homicide cases is that the accused has caused the death of a human being. The actus reus of murder or manslaughter cannot be established without this. The victim must be human. Only human beings are protected by homicide law. Death must occur. Clear determination of when death happened. It must be unlawful. Lawful killings, that is by a police officer in their police actions, lawfully is excluded. And causation is required. Defendant must cause the victim's death. Some points to know about when does life begin. The defendant will only be guilty of murder or manslaughter if the victim is a human being. This aspect has occasionally been disputed, particularly regarding unborn children. It is not homicide to kill a child in the womb, and abortion is not murder. To be given protection of homicide law, the child must be wholly expelled from the mother's body, be alive and have an existence independent of the mother. The courts require independent circulation and that the child has drawn breath after birth. The key case here is R versus Poulton, established the requirement for complete expulsion from the mother's body. And the case of the conjoined twins case, this was a high-profile case in 2000 involving the decision by courts on whether to allow separation of conjoined twins that would result in the death of the weaker twin Mary. In Re A Children Conjoined Twins, Surgical Separation 2000, it was argued that Mary, having an undeveloped heart, lungs and brain, and depending on the stronger twin Jodie for survival, was not a separate person. This argument was unanimously rejected by the Court of Appeal. The judge in that case stated that Mary had an existence quite independent of her mother, and the interdependence should not prevent recognition of separate persons under criminal law. What about if there is injury to the womb and death after birth? In very rare instances, assault takes place whilst the unborn child is in the womb of the mother, but death occurs afterwards. This was confirmed in Attorney General Reference Number 3, 1994-1997, where the defendant stabbed his pregnant girlfriend. The stab wound penetrated the fetus, the baby was born prematurely and died 120 days later. The House of Lords ruled murder could not be committed where unlawful injury was deliberately inflicted to a mother carrying a child. The reasoning, the mens rea in relation to the mother could not be transferred to the unborn fetus. Alternative liability, defendant could be liable for unlawful act manslaughter. Another interesting question and key question in homicide cases is, when does death occur? Having identified the victim as a human being, the next issue to consider is when the victim actually dies. This may sound odd, but there could be difference of opinion, particularly in the light of medical advances. So when they stop breathing, traditional understanding of death; when they are brain dead, modern medical definition; when kept alive artificially, life support complications; and when the heart stops breathing, cardiac definition of death. Obviously, a person who is already dead cannot be killed. The Maltrek and Steele case, the defendant assaulted the victim, resulting in brain damage. The victim was put on a life support machine. The facts having concluded the victim was brain dead, doctors disconnected the machine and the victim was pronounced dead half an hour later. The defendant argued that it was the doctors, not he, who had caused the death. The argument was rejected by the Court of Appeal. The defendant's acts was clearly an operating and substantial cause of death. The judge said in this, the irreversible death of the brain stem, which controls the basic functions of the body, such as breathing. When that occurs, it is said that the body has died, even though by mechanical means the lungs are being caused to operate and some circulation of blood is taking place. It is irrelevant that medical staff switch off life support. The perpetrator remains liable for death. And what about the issue of unlawful killings and causation? Again, this is the issue of unlawful requirement is key. Homicide requires that the death of the victim is unlawfully caused. If a police officer shoots a terrorist about to detonate a bomb, this would be lawful killing, as it is justified to prevent crime and defend others. And then the other issue is causation rules. The accused must cause the death of a human being. The usual rules of causation apply. Prosecution must prove the defendant was both factual and legal cause of the victim's death. And this is a question for the jury to determine. And please watch the videos on causation. Going back to the true and false questions and the introduction to homicide, please feel free to pause the slide and answer the questions, and then check the next slide for the answers. Here are the answers to those true and false questions. Please feel free to pause it and look at the next slide. This is the single best answer question 1 and single best answer question 2. Check what your answer would be with the next slide. This is the answer to single best answer question 2 and single best answer question 1 and 2. And then finally, single best answer question 3. See what your answer is, and then check what your answer is with the next slide. This is the answer, and there's the reasoning there from that case that we mentioned in the class. So the key takeaways are these. Homicide structure. Generic term covering murder, voluntary manslaughter, unlawful manslaughter, and gross negligent manslaughter. Human being is required. Victims must be wholly expelled from the mother's body, alive, and have independent existence. There's a definition of death: irreversible death of brainstem controlling basic bodily functions, and it must be unlawfully causation. Defendant must unlawfully cause death as both factual and legal cause. Understanding these fundamental elements is crucial for comprehending how homicide law operates in practice and the relationship between different offences within the serious area of criminal law. And just final slide, future criminal law classes. Please, if you want to get a really good understanding of homicide offences and the partial defences, please watch all the classes. You know, there's a class on murder, voluntary manslaughter, diminished responsibility, that partial defence, voluntary manslaughter and loss of control, the partial defence. There's a class on involuntary manslaughter and gross negligent manslaughter. There's a class on involuntary manslaughter and lawful act manslaughter. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more, and please like and comment on these classes. Tell me what you think, and see you in the next class.